so much for joining us today for our webinar. We are so excited that you are here today and joining us. I just wanted to quickly make sure everybody knows that on our webinar today, we do have a Q&A section. If you do have some questions, you are welcome to chat those in, and we will see if we might have the opportunity to address those for you today. But thanks again so much for joining us. I am Melissa Haley. I am with Agent Advantage Coaching and Training. And today we're going to be talking about what all agents in Texas need to know. So first, I would love to introduce everyone. So everyone that is here, please feel free to wave when I introduce you today. So today we are joined by Chelsea Buckholtz, Executive Director of the Texas Real Estate Commission. We are also joined by Scott Kessner, Chair of the Texas Real Estate Commission. Travis Kessler, President and CEO of Texas Realtors. And of course, Marcus Phipps, the 2023 Chairman of Texas Realtors. So welcome, everybody. Thanks so much for joining me today. All right, so we have a lot of stuff to cover. The things that we have to cover today are things that are important for all agents in the state of Texas, all licensed persons. So I really want to just get us started and just jump right in. And I think that the first thing that people should understand, of course, because we have both TREC and Texas Realtors here today, is the role of each organization. And I know that sometimes consumers and sometimes even agents are confused about who is responsible for what. So Chelsea, would you mind just starting off letting us know what is TREC's role in the real estate business?
Absolutely. Well, I will tell you that I got a call just last week from someone who even is very involved in Texas Realtors, who wanted to know about professional standards filing that that must have been filed with TREC. And I was like, oh goodness, that's not us. So here's what we do. TREC is the entity that provides a license for our license holders to do business, to be a sales agent, to be a broker, not to be a realtor, but to be a sales agent, broker, inspector, or several others. We collect fees related to that license, and then we issue discipline if there is a violation against the Real Estate License Act. So we are a regulatory entity. We are not an association. We cannot lobby the legislature. I have had people, sometimes when people are frustrated, they'll get to me somehow and they'll say, you know what, I'm just not going to pay my dues. And I say, well, oh goodness, we don't take dues, we take fees. But if you stop paying your fees, you won't be able to do your job. Then you'll have a disciplinary action for unlicensed activity. And it doesn't help. It's not a helpful explanation in the moment, but it is helpful to know the difference.
Very good. I think that that's important. You are in charge of licensed persons, but Travis, you, my friend, are in charge of realtors. So what is the role of Texas Realtors, Travis?
Well, thank you, Melissa. And Melissa, thank you for doing this webinar this afternoon. And Chelsea, you did a great job in talking about the role of TREC and the difference between TREC and Texas Realtors. So I'll elaborate just a little bit on the Texas Realtors side. And I have to tell you, Chelsea is about a mile from our office. And so she's on one side of the state capitol and we're on the other side of the state capitol. So in proximity, we're fairly close. But I have to tell you, we each get a lot of calls that belong to the other entity. And Chelsea, I think you said it well. TREC is the regulatory side, and we're the trade association, the professional organization, in order to use the term realtor. And so we have different functions. As Chelsea said, we don't issue a license, we don't maintain the license, and we do not have a revocation of a license. We monitor and use the term realtor. And so one thing, and Scott Kessner is chairman of TREC, and I've had this discussion for years, Texas probably leads the country. 84% of our realtors, or 84% of licensees are realtors. And so that's a very high percentage, probably higher than most other states. So there's a lot of compatibility and a lot of overlap if 84% are actually realtors. And Chelsea, you're right. I think we get a lot of respective calls on how do I renew my license, but a lot of it is on enforcement. And the enforcement side is that we do the code of ethics, and TREC does the License Act and the standards that you all have in what you've got under the Licensing Act. And so there's a big difference in both of those, even though they're compatible. We do get respective phone calls for both organizations. But Melissa, I would say the biggest difference, and I'm going to highlight the differences in kind of our top rated services that we do as the trade association and using the term realtor. And the first one is our statewide platform for forms and contracts. While TREC has forms and contracts, we have a statewide platform for all realtors with 130 forms on it. And so that is probably rated as our #1 member benefit as a realtor at the state level. We also have a legal hotline, and we get thousands of calls per year. And just to highlight it, even though TREC has an enforcement division and there are attorneys within the enforcement division, we have a legal hotline. So if somebody is referencing a legal hotline, that's Texas Realtors. And so as a result of that, we are not a legal representative. So we're not someone's attorney, but we can answer questions. And most of those questions, I would say 80% of our legal hotline questions are on contracts. And it's just understanding the contract. And I will tell you, for every call we get on interpreting that contract, we get the other side the same day with just a call later in the day. So every time we get one, we will get two within hours of each other. Processing code of ethics, pretty common with what we do versus TREC doing license enforcement. But Chelsea, you highlighted it well. We do advocacy. We are a lobby team. We're across the street from the Capitol for a reason. And while TREC can't lobby, they can serve as an expert witness. But we can actively, not as a state agency, we can actually do the advocacy side and the lobbying side for all of that. The difference also is in communication. Communication we do through electronic newsletters, specialty newsletters, a magazine, 6 to 10 issues per year. And we focus on issues and trends impacting the realtor, success factors and tools and tips to help and enhance the success of a realtor. And so risk management tools, education that we do on webinars, a big factor. And then the other aspect that I think we're different from TREC is on that we have access to all MLS data across the state of Texas. So we compile and we deduplicate all the data and provide all the market statistics for the state of Texas that we give to our local boards of realtors. And so to me, those are the kind of, Melissa, the key differences between TREC and Texas Realtors.
Yeah, I agree. And I think it's important that agents understand, that licensed people in the state understand there is a difference. And who do you call when you have a problem, depending on what the problem is? It's important to just understand what everybody's doing. And I think I like that Travis kind of brought up, one of the things is forms, right? And Texas Realtors provides forms, but so does TREC. So TREC promulgates some forms. But Marcus, can you just talk a little bit about maybe the differences in those, or why are some forms from TREC and others aren't? And I think sometimes that confuses people.
It can be incredibly confusing, Melissa, but the key thing for anyone to remember, especially a licensee, is that forms that are promulgated by TREC are between principals in a transaction. The 1 to 4 family residential contract is a TREC promulgated form that must be used by anyone selling property in the state of Texas. It's between the buyer and the seller. Things like the listing agreement, the buyer representation agreement, other notices and disclosures and such. Although TREC does have some disclosures, most disclosures that you have in your statewide forms platform do come from Texas Realtors, and a lot of the notices that aren't required but are incredibly helpful, like the general information and notice to buyers and sellers, Texas Realtors Form 1506, which is used so broadly by brokers and their agents throughout the state, provides incredible information that will keep you off of Scott's shelf because, while I'm here to help you enhance and enjoy your license, Scott's there to take it away when the time comes. So, but no, you're there to help people understand what they did wrong and how not to do it again, right? But our forms, so many of our disclosures and information forms are there to protect you, the realtor, and keep you out of hot water, especially if you utilize them correctly and go through them with your property owners. Some of the similarities: our forms platform includes all of the promulgated TREC forms. They just come under a different number with Texas Realtors. So you'll see it and they look a little bit different because the font may be a little bit different. But some differences with that, like TREC's seller's disclosure notice it conforms 100% with the law. Whereas Texas Realtor seller's disclosure is more in-depth. It's like 7 pages now. When I started, I think the Texas Realtor's form was 2 pages, and now it's like 7, and TREC's is still shorter, but is much more in-depth than it used to be, especially related to flooding. But our form contains some information that has evolved from lawsuits over time, and including more to allow the seller to disclose more than the law requires, where TREC's form adheres strictly to the law and covers everything that the law says. This is what a seller must disclose. So that's a little bit of the difference in those forms. It's also important to note that all commercial forms that are in our statewide forms library are Texas Realtors forms. And those forms are available to commercial practitioners who are not realtors, as well as our members who are commercial practitioners. We definitely encourage people to be proficient in commercial real estate before attempting to use those forms, again, so you don't wind up on Scott's desk for practicing outside your scope of responsibility. But those forms are there. There's a commercial listing agreement, a commercial buyer representation agreement, commercial contracts, commercial leases, all those forms that are available and are provided by Texas Realtors, and TREC does not have specific forms for commercial real estate. So those things are helpful to remember. But disclosures, keep yourself out of hot water forms, things that are great for information and enhancements to other things that Texas Real Estate Commission provides are the forms that we bring. And again, we provide that as a benefit of membership to all 150,000 Texas Realtors statewide at no additional cost on their fees. And we haven't raised fees to include it in the platform either. So it's been great.
Yeah. Wow. Good stuff. And, I want to stay on forms for a second. And Scott, can I bounce it to you? Because there's been some forms changes that are coming, but I also think you might have some things to say about some of the forms that we just mentioned as Marcus was kind of talking. So Scott, tell us what's changing and any other thoughts you have on forms.
Okay, be glad to. First of all, I want to welcome you to Broker Lawyer Committee as one of the new appointees. So I hope you're prepared for 9-hour meetings. But anyway, welcome to Broker Lawyer. I want to just address what Marcos said. If you appear before us, we're just there to help you finish the journey you voluntarily started when you did that transaction. Okay, so we're just there to assist with the end. Probably the one form I want to talk about real quick is the Consumer Protection Notice. The legislature this year, they repealed the recovery fund for inspectors. So since they repealed the recovery fund for inspectors, a consumer notice form needs to be updated. That affects real estate brokers, sales agents, easement, right-of-ways. Consumer protection notice should be posted on your website, also in your office. So if it's in your office, you might want to print it out and change that 8x10 picture frame in a prominent location so when people come in. If it is on your website or your email and it links to TREC, you don't have to do anything. The link will automatically be changed, almost like it was when we did the IABS a couple years ago and stuff like that. So that was really the big change. It was legislatively. A lot of the changes we'll see are legislatively, and I'll have Chelsea talk about the seller disclosure. That's what we do. If it's legislative, that's what we provide. And so I'll have her say a little bit about the seller disclosure. That was probably the most. I had more calls on the seller disclosure change this time than I've had on any other form change in the last 5 years. Which really surprised me. I was really shocked, but I have Chelsea go into little details on that if it's okay.
Yeah.
Sure, absolutely. So I'll tell you what changed in the seller disclosure notice. If a seller knows, they now, or as of September 1st, must disclose the type of piping used for gas supply lines, black iron pipe, copper, corrugated stainless steel. This is pretty complicated, in my opinion, and sellers may not know at first, but this is information that the inspectors are required to note in their inspection report. And so over time, more sellers will know what kind of piping they have by referring to that inspection report and be able to report that. The new form is on the TREC website. It should only be used for contracts executed on or after September 1. So we have a few weeks, but you'll see that change on our website. I did want to mention also, Scott mentioned the broker lawyer committee, and congratulations, Melissa, on joining that elite team. Our broker lawyer committee meets quarterly, if not more, to make changes to the forms that we promulgate. And I'll tell you that if, as a license holder, if you have any changes you would like to see, the broker lawyer committee at every meeting goes through comments that they receive through our office that at an email address I'll mention, general.counsel@trec.texas.gov. They go through each one of those comments one by one. And so if you have a strong opinion on a form change, then feel free to email general.counsel@trec.texas.gov and make your opinion known, and the broker lawyer committee will consider that. They don't make all the changes requested of them. Obviously, one of my favorite things that they mention in those meetings are the 5% rule. They don't make changes for the 5%. But that committee is very effective, and I encourage you all to watch one of their meetings to understand how the process works.
I love that. I love that. And I saw, and I think it's an upcoming important topic. I don't know if we'll have time to get to it today or not, but mud districts and MUDs and PIDs and water districts and all of that stuff. And I saw that, there's still some discussion about what those forms might all need to look like. So maybe we'll have time to cover some of that later today too. That'd be great. Thanks, Chelsea. All right. So another thing that I think Marcus kind of brought it up is like the client representation agreements that are between a Realtor member, when you are a Realtor and you're a member of Texas Realtors, when you're a Realtor member and you're dealing with a consumer and you want that representation agreement between yourself and your consumer, right? So these representation agreements. And I think right now that is huge. And I think it's going to get more and more and more. I think it's just going to keep coming to the top, right? Because of some things that are going on with NAR. So do you mind, Travis, just kind of chatting about that for just a second? And I'm specifically referring to buyer representation.
Yeah, Melissa, great question. And Marcus and I are going to spend the next few minutes going over the Department of Justice, known as the DOJ, and some class action lawsuits. And we'll go back and forth on highlighting some of these. But I'm always a Stephen Covey fan, and it's always begin with the end in mind. And you asked about DOJ and buyer representation agreements. Mm-hmm. And so let me focus a little bit on that, because the buyer representation agreement and our IABS, information about brokerage service forms, are just instrumental in everything that's happening in the discussion with the Department of Justice and the class action lawsuits that we're facing as an industry around the country. And so let me focus a little bit on this collaboration that I think we have so well with TREC. Between Texas Realtors and TREC, I think we lead the country in having those two forms, an IEBS and the buyer representation form. In light of all these lawsuits and the DOJ investigation, we're finding that states across the country are not as uniform as Texas. We have good forms. We have good transparency in our forms. Our forms educate the consumer. And so I commend the Real Estate Commission and what you do to have good forms like that, because without it, I think we would have more issues in Texas than we do. So as a result of this, the buyer representation form has to be used. And we've got a good one in Texas. And I'm going to just jump right to it, because the premise of the lawsuits and the DOJ investigation, Melissa, the whole premise on this is that home sellers unfairly pay commissions of buyer brokers. I mean, that's the whole premise of the investigation and the lawsuits. And these class action allegations say that we have fixed and inflated commissions, that our code of ethics discourages negotiation of commissions, and that we have a mischaracterization of the value of using a realtor. So that's the premise on what Marcus is going to talk about in the class action, and that's the premise of what we're dealing with the Department of Justice. And so what we contend and what we're doing and trying to do a better job of is communicating and educating the Texas Realtor on the importance and the value of a buyer representation agreement. A buyer representation agreement promotes transparency in the transaction of the roles and responsibilities for representation, but also the compensation side of it. So it's all there in that buyer rep agreement. It avoids misunderstandings, and it establishes a contractual relationship on an agency relationship between the agent and the buyer. So Melissa, if I could just stress the heck out of using that buyer representation agreement, we do not statutorily or regulatory have a mandated buyer rep agreement. And frankly, that may come out at the end of the day on some of these lawsuits in the Department of Justice investigation, that maybe they should be mandatory as we do with other forms. But if we use it and we use it correctly, Texas Realtors are doing a better job in that transparency to make sure that that consumer fully understands it. And I'm going to point to two websites that I think are extremely important in light of all these investigations with the DOJ and the class action lawsuits. We deal with two websites that we say we need to promote transparency. We need to educate on what is the value of a realtor, and we need to educate the consumer of how commissions are paid in a transaction. So there are two websites, nar.competition and realestateCommissionFacts.com. And we would encourage every brokerage, every agent to look at that and start using the language, the tips, the marketing information to promote the value of those terms and what you do to the consumer to show that value, because it really does hit to the heart of the premise of why these lawsuits are in place. And so I think that buyer representation agreement is critical. I think the higher use of it, the better in light of these lawsuits, even though we're in the middle of them. And the fact that it serves as a communication and an education tool is just paramount in that whole discussion. And Marcus, why don't you elaborate a little bit then on the class action lawsuits, because we're in the midst of that one, and the trials on that one, the first one, starts as early as October. And this is going to be a precedent-setting case, whether we win or lose, that could determine our steps to either do what we're doing or whether there'd have to be changes in settlements that would have to be paid on what the allegations are in the class action lawsuits.
Right, and these lawsuits, it's important to note, are in Illinois and Missouri, not in Texas right now. But these people, as Travis said, they paid buyer broker commissions. Did they really? Well, yeah, they did, but did they really? Under their agreement, they paid their listing broker, and the listing broker compensated the buyer's broker as a part of their MLS agreement or whatever form they used to make that payment. What they're saying is that they unknowingly made that payment to the buyer's broker and therefore compensated somebody who worked against them, if you will, in a transaction. And that's why they feel it's unfair and the commissions are inflated, and we created this system. It's their attorneys who feel that way. I guess it's probably important to say that, but and they've pressed these sellers to come out and participate in this class action lawsuit, which is huge. It could be very impactful on the way that we do business today. It could impact the way MLSs operate. If these plaintiffs are victorious, the ramifications will go deep to all of us. So it's important that we are paying attention to it and participating. NAR does believe that they will continue to be triumphant in these lawsuits, but we can tell you they're nervous. I mean, they've told us they are taking this incredibly seriously and they're nervous. One thing Travis alluded to was that our buyer representation agreement is not mandatory. And I'm sorry, I talk really, really fast, Melissa. I get excited when I start talking about things I really like to talk about. But in the state of Washington and in a couple other states already, buyer brokerage has become mandatory. In Washington, if you're going to represent a client, you must do so by written agreement. Well, in Texas, attorneys do that. We do it with our sellers. So we're creating a fiduciary responsibility to a client without using an agreement that tells them how we're going to get paid. Maybe that's not the best practice. So we probably should be using these buyer representation agreements all the time in every transaction that we do. And as Travis said, I would imagine that as soon as the 2025 legislative session, or if we can even start to explore it before, that may be coming to us sooner than we know. So it's like, if you're not already doing it, it's time to learn that agreement. The one thing that I will say about Texas Realtors and our Texas Realtors listing agreement, if you use the Texas Realtors listing agreement, you disclose to every seller every time you list a property that you are going to pay a buyer's broker so much money. So you're telling them. And in other states, I'm not sure that's a part of their listing agreement or not, but we have been telling for as long as I've been in the business, 27 years I've been in this business, using the Texas Realtors listing agreement, I have disclosed to my property owner, I am going to give this amount of my commission to the buyer's broker. And they know that. And if you cover that as a part of your listing agreement, you can take that responsibility up front, and they already know. And it's that unknowingly fact that has gotten people in so much trouble. The real factor that drove a lot of these lawsuits, especially the DOJ lawsuit, was that brokers, realtors, agents have a tendency to offer their services for free. I don't work for free. Yeah. I know Melissa doesn't work for free. Scott Kestner certainly doesn't work for free, and neither do any of his agents, because they are all 100% professional people. But we disclose to people that we're going to get paid. But that phone call that comes in to your office when you're sitting on floor duty, and you say, hey, you know what, that property is already off the market. Let me set up a search for you, and I can start to work for you. And the best thing about what I'm going to do for you is I'm going to give you up to the date information. And what I'm doing for you is going to cost you absolutely nothing. And you just gave the DOJ permission to prosecute NAR by using those words, because you have no intention of guiding that client through a customer through a transaction without being paid. So at that point in time, you can say, what I'm going to do for you today isn't going to cost you anything, but I do want to take the opportunity to tell you how I get paid and how I will expect to be paid. And we can address that really, really quickly and take care of it, because you don't expect to work for free. And I have heard seasoned agents, brokers, as I travel around the state and have the opportunity to ride in cars, I've heard agents take incoming field calls and use those words in the last 6 months. So it's great educational opportunity to talk to one of those folks, but you cannot in any way, and this is now a part of our MLS rules. It was written in as part of 8.0. You cannot offer your services for free at all. So just stop doing it and utilize that buyer representation agreement to say, I do expect to be paid as a part of this transaction. This is how much I expect to be paid. This is how I expect to get it. I'm going to seek to get it first from the seller's broker or the seller. And if I can't get all of it, or if I can't get any of it, I am going to be expecting to get it from you.
Yeah, I agree.
Marcus, one of the important aspects of this, though, is the importance that in the realtor side of this is that our philosophy and the NAR policy on operating an MLS is that you have the right to know in advance the compensation for which you could earn prior to being involved in the transaction. So at the premise and at the heart of what Marcus is referring to in the class action lawsuits and the DOJ would be the cornerstone for what we have in Texas called an MLS. And MLSs were formed many, many decades ago for the formation of cooperation and compensation. So if these lawsuits were to look at transparency in compensation and put the burden of financial reimbursement, financial fees to a buyer's broker, it's a big shift in the policy of how we have and how we operate an MLS. And so right now, the philosophy is that there has to be something in the buyer rep fee for what we have that is in advance notice to a buyer broker of what that fee could be. Now, even though there is a policy and a rule within that from NAR MLS policy, but in light of the DOJ and in light of the class action lawsuits, we are seeing a trend in other parts of the country that they're changing the tangible value of compensation, that it could be zero. And that's a big shift in what we've done, because that does put the burden on a buyer, that we think there could be lender qualification issues. We think that could be an affordability issue for a buyer in buying a property. So Melissa and Marcus in particular, this is of great concern to the Realtor organization for the future of how we operate an MLS. And so beginning as early as this fourth quarter, we're going to start seeing some rollout of potential changes or potential renderings in the lawsuit.
Yeah, I know. I 100% agree. And I've been seeing some chatter on the social media channels of other realtors in other states saying things like, we're now allowed to put in a 0 commission to be shared. I mean, it's coming, and we need to be prepared. I think it's important. So thank you guys for bringing that up. And that's a huge change to the way that we do business, and it's an important change that realtors need to understand. Matter of fact, I've been preaching for the last couple of weeks for people to go take this ABR designation, because that's going to be so helpful to understand some of these things and why you need to be able to share your value proposition with a buyer. But man, if that wasn't enough, there's even more rule changes. There's more changes coming. Scott, can I put you on the spot on a couple of changes? Because I know you mentioned new form changes that are effective September 1st that you and Chelsea both mentioned, but there's some other rule changes that are coming October 1st. I feel like there's a September one, there's an October one, and then there's some January 1 stuff. Let's go to October now. What's changing in October that everybody needs to know about?
Well, it's the 30-hour brokerage class. And I'll be honest with you, I think that's something for the last 15 years. Me and Chelsea have had this conversation. When did we really start focusing on broker responsibility? Was it the IABS when we added the broker's name? Was it when we put a broker working group together? When was it? And this is just another step in identifying broker responsibility. Years ago, before someone took their classes, the broker had to meet with them, vet them, basically sponsor them prior to going to get classes. And so now they go to class, they come out of class, they go to work for a broker, and they have no idea what to ask. And so as of October 1st, if you're renewing your license after October 1st, one of the 30-hour SAE, Salesperson's Apprentice Education, not CE, is going to be a 30-hour brokerage class. And I like it, because I think it gives the people some insight on what maybe their broker should be doing, and maybe what they should be doing with their broker, what their relationship with their broker should be. And is the broker supervising the first 3 transactions? Is the broker returning their calls? Is the broker being responsible and supervising? And so legislatively, again, we can do it during the 90-hour SAE. Now, there was a little concern that, well, I took it as SAE, and somehow I'm not sure how the math works. It might be some of that new math they're teaching in school now. I decided to sit for my broker's test, and I have to retake brokerage. And the answer is yes, you do. The difference is, when I'm sitting there as a student learning what my broker should be doing in the relationship, I'm at a totally different point in my career understanding what the broker should be doing on his end. So there is a possibility you will take it twice within, I don't think there's any way within 2 years. I just don't see it. My math doesn't make sense. But you could take it theoretically 3 years apart or whatever. But I think you're in a different part of your career, and probably a different part of your life as far as what you get out of that class. Not speaking as a chairman, speaking as a broker that's here every day supervising and seeing agents and seeing transactions. I love it. Absolutely love it. Because a lot of people don't know what the relationship should be and what the responsibilities are. I mean, we're here to protect the consumer, and I think the brokerage class certainly helps the two people involved, the broker and the agent, complete that. So I'm excited about it, and I'll have Chelsea add anything to it that I probably missed or messed up. But I love it, and that's after October 1st.
Yeah,
Chelsea, do you have anything to add?
That's great. What we know about broker responsibility is that there's no one change that we can make that will just make all brokers responsible and will just be, the thing. So our goal is to move in that direction, to make positive changes continually to ensure that brokers are responsible for those that they supervise.
Yeah, I agree. And I taught broker responsibility yesterday, and we brought this up that this was coming. And some of the people were like, wait, my people have to take this class? And I said, no, it'd be a great idea if they all took this class, but this is only 6 hours and they're going to need 30. And that's a different thing. And we talked about GRI, which of course is something that Texas Realtors provides because there's a 30-hour brokerage module in the GRI. So many important things people need to know with regard to broker responsibility. And you know what else I think, Scott, because I'm a broker too, and I'm kind of like you. I love it. I think it's great. But I think it's smart for the agent to know what their broker should do. But I also think it's smart for the agent to understand how they can help their broker, that they can help their broker mitigate some risk here by really, truly understanding what the roles and responsibilities are.
And let me add, you brought GRI, and I wish I would have mentioned that. The brokerage class in GRI will count as the brokerage with Trek. So, I mean, we did not disengage. A few years ago, there was some financing that kind of got disengaged. We definitely did not want that to happen again. So that is a great way to get your 90 hours.
Perfect.
A few additional
Very
things on
best
broker
way to make it.
responsibility. This is a shameless plug. At the last commission meeting earlier this month, the commission authorized a broker responsibility advisory committee. And this will replace the broker responsibility working group, which is more like an ad hoc working group. And this will formalize that group into an actual advisory committee. We're currently taking applications to be a part of that advisory committee, and those applications need to be submitted by next Tuesday, August 29th. So if anyone's interested in doing that, you can find more information on our website. But we're filling an entire committee. So having a large number of applicants would be helpful to make sure that we have a diverse population included in that committee.
Chelsea, all that is really worth repeating. I wish you would say that again so people can have an opportunity to come back and catch it. You're
Absolutely, and I bet
group.
Summer will post a link to more information. But Broker Responsibility Advisory Committee is currently seeking applicants, and so go apply today.
Awesome.
So Chelsea, you said you need a wide pool of applicants. Do they all need to be brokers? Are you looking for members who are not brokers that can have that opposite, like I'm an agent, I'm not a broker, and here's how it seems to me when it's coming? Is that something, or are we just really looking for brokers?
Must have a broker license and been engaged in the practice of brokerage activity for at least 5 years before the appointment. So we're looking for some experienced brokers.
Perfect. That I think is good clarification. Awesome. All right. Well, I feel like we've talked about some stuff that's kind of stressful, buyer representation and lawsuits and changes to the consumer protection notice and all of these things. But can we shift gears a little bit and talk about a little bit of good news? Because I feel like we had some really great wins on this last legislative session. We not only got some things handled that we needed to handle, like that consumer protection notice, right? Some of those legislative things, like Scott said, they come down from legislation and then TREC handles them. But I'm super excited that in the Texas Realtors advocacy efforts, we played a part in property tax relief. So Travis, Marcus, I'm going to let you guys just kind of run with that if you don't mind. What is coming and what does this mean for consumers?
Do you want the long version or the short version?
Well, all right, we have 20 minutes left in our webinar. So that's what we got.
I could talk about the legislative session and property tax reform for about 2 hours, but we can give you a condensed version on that for sure.
Okay.
We were engaged from day one. Property tax, actually, we were engaged 180 days prior to the start of the session, if you really want to have a more accurate story. But the governor, the lieutenant governor, and the speaker of the House, as well as Texas Realtors, all had property tax relief for all Texans as number one on their priority list coming into this legislative session. And boy, howdy, everybody has their own idea about how to make it happen. Everybody has things that they think are critical, and that there were no compromises to be made where that was concerned. But all in all, with the legislative session, over 8,000 bills were filed. Texas Realtors followed those that were related directly to real estate, the practice of real estate, the real estate commission, anything else. Over 2,500 of those bills. We engaged on 100-ish different bills where we provided written testimony or spoken testimony. But our main focus throughout the course of the session was on this property tax relief. The Senate version was all about increasing the homestead exemption and providing, relief in a few other ways, but keying in on the homestead exemption. The House version was focused on appraisal caps, almost entirely on appraisal caps on all types of property, which as a consumer, as a taxpayer, everybody's like, yes, cap that appraisal, 5% sounds great. That's great. But I can tell you, in 2 years, 3 years of property appraisal caps for taxation purposes, the real estate market is destroyed. California did it many years ago. They have been trying to unwind it ever since. Appraisal caps they're a great short-term solution, especially for the taxpayer, but long-term, they wreck the real estate industry. They trap people in their homes and make it impossible for them to look to sell. So what we looked for was a good compromise on everything that we had, and we helped them get there tremendously. What's coming? That's what you asked. The big question, what's coming? The homestead exemption for property owners living in their homes filed with a homestead exemption is going up $60,000. It is currently $40,000. It's going up to $100,000. So the first $100,000 of your evaluation will be exempt from property tax, from M&O tax anyway, with the school district, which is your largest tax, regardless. The state amount that they are kicking in, we call this the compression rate. The state is going to kick in another 10.7 cents on your rate. So if your school district charges you $1.10.7 for $100 evaluation for your house, that amount in this coming year would actually be $1, because the state is going to pick up that additional 10.7 cents in that school district tax. This is going to equate to over $1,300 for homesteads. It's huge. Also, there was an increase to the franchise tax, excluding more than 50% of Texas businesses from even have to file a franchise tax report annually when they do their taxes. And the big one, it does have to do with appraisal caps. We called it a circuit breaker. Our vice president of governmental affairs sat with the governor, and he's saying, I just can't deal with these appraisal caps. And if I said the speaker, I meant the lieutenant governor, sat with the lieutenant governor and said, I can't deal with these appraisal caps. Trey said, look, at 20%, it's not necessarily a cap, it's a circuit breaker. And we have years like 2020, 2021, 2022, where property values went up 30, 40%. That's unusual. Can we cap them at 5%? No, but can we trip it at 20% so that if we have a mass surge again, these people aren't overburdened with their property taxes going up by 50% year over year? And if you think about an apartment complex or a strip mall or a large office complex where these properties are huge and their tax bills are huge, going up by 50% really crushes their revenue. So we put in that circuit breaker at 20% cap on all property In any given year, and this is on a 3-year trial period, in any given year on a 3-year trial period, a property tax appraisal amount, the taxable amount cannot increase by more than 20%. So that was a huge compromise, seen as a circuit breaker. Circuit breaker has become we're going to give t-shirts to all the legislators that say circuit breaker on them, and have Trey Bates sign it underneath, because I tell you what, with all the lobbying that we did, that one-on-one meeting really pushed this over the finish line. So it was truly a great compromise that we saw with property tax relief. However, and I'm going to let Travis talk about this, it's up to the voters. All of our appraisal districts across the state, we know right now, they're already putting in the $100,000 homestead exemption. They're already tripping appraisal caps at 20%, and they're implementing these factors now, but it's up to the voters on November the 7th. And Travis, you want to talk about that?
Yeah, Marcus, thank you. And just a compliment to you and our legislative management team. It was a tough session. And to know that we had so many wins, but the fact that property tax relief was at the top of the list, the governor's priority and our priority, we are seeing some positive results as our relationship with the state of Texas. And so let's talk about the constitutional amendments. They're called propositions. And Marcus alluded to the fact that property tax relief is one of those constitutional amendments that we have to vote on. So let me give you some dates for this. Marcus, you mentioned that November 7th is that voting day. So everybody, November 7th is a key date. But if you're like me, I just always enjoy going for early voting at my convenience, as most of us do. And so early voting is October the 23rd through November the 3rd. October 23rd through November the 3rd. And Angela's going to put into chat a website that we're going to make live on Texas Real Estate Support on talking about all of these constitutional amendments known as propositions. And so let me go through a little bit about those pretty quickly. And that is that there will be 14 propositions on the ballot on November the 7th. And of those 14, Texas Realtors has supported several of them. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of these are based on Texas Realtor support that Angela is going to put into the link for you to have access to. And this is important because we do a member-facing and a public-facing campaign on these amendments. And so let's look at what we have endorsed as the industry for realtors. Number one is Proposition number 1, a line of support. And we support it because Proposition 1 basically preserves property rights and protects one of the largest industries that we have in Texas. And it's our whole benefit is reliability and access to safe and affordable food. And so right to farm is Proposition number 1. And we support that, have gone on record, and will also do some promotion of our support of Proposition 1. Proposition 4 is what Marcus just talked about. Proposition 4 is probably our key one. And you bet we're going to do public facing on this one and realtor facing to make sure that everyone understands the importance of voting on this matter. These things don't happen without this being voted upon by the citizens of Texas. The voters of Texas have to make this happen. We can have worked all day long in the House and the Senate and with the governor on property tax relief. But if the Texas consumer, the Texas voter does not support this, all that is for naught. And so Proposition 4, Marcus alluded to it and explained it well, that homestead exemption, that 20% cap on non-homesteaded exemption, less than 5 million, key points for voting by that Texas voter on November 7th. The third one that we support is Proposition 6, and that establishes a Texas water fund. Now, everybody knows in Texas, water has become one of the most valuable commodities that we have. It's right up there with every mineral right that we have. And so under Proposition number 6, it just helps us ensure that we have quality water in Texas. We have to have clean water, and it's about preserving that value for real estate as it relates to water. So we are in favor of Proposition 6 and support it. Proposition 7 is the Texas Energy Fund. And as we all know, we have faced just a heartbreaking summer with the Texas heat and no rain. And if we look at our energy grid, we've got to meet the needs of tomorrow. We've had harsh winters and we've had unbearable summers, all impacting our Texas energy grid. So this is a Texas energy fund that helps ensure the growth and the capabilities of our energy grid. So we are on record as supporting proposition number 7. And our last one of the 14 would be proposition 8, and that is broadband infrastructure funding. We all know that all parts of the state are not equal. In some of our rural areas, there is not good broadband access. So this supports this with the financial support, an office in the state of Texas on broadband. And so again, to equalize the accessibility for internet accessibility in the state of Texas. So again, support for number 1, number 4, number 6, number 7, and number 8 out of those 14 propositions. We have a website. You'll see public and member facing for that November 7th election.
And it's important to note on that, Melissa, that we don't oppose any of the propositions. The others we're neutral on. They don't necessarily affect real estate or taxation in any way, so we don't put an opinion on them, but we will be advocating on behalf of the 6 that Travis mentioned. This legislative session, we've already had 2 special sessions, both that we're dealing with property tax relief. We're going to have at least one, probably certainly 2, and probably 3 more special sessions before this 88th legislative session comes to a close. But it's been interesting. We've done a lot of good, prevented some bad, and it's been a journey. So
yeah,
it was really, really surreal to be in attendance with Travis and Trey last week in Houston when the governor signed the property tax relief bills. Truly overwhelming. Texas Realtors actually got a shout out from the lieutenant governor while the governor was signing the bills. It only takes like 10 minutes to sign 3 bills, 1 letter at a time. But it's fabulous.
Well,
great relief coming our way.
I have a question / clarification, because I know that the vote is in November and I know property taxes is the big deal, but if we vote and it passes in November, it does go retroactive back to January 1st of 2023. Is that correct?
Yes, the appraisal districts are already making the adjustments. When I went in to protest my my taxable valuation, I didn't protest my value, just my taxable valuation. Read those statements, folks. They make mistakes. The $100,000 homestead exemption had already been applied.
Awesome, because they're anticipating that the Texans are going to be smart about it, and we're going to say yes to property tax reform, because we do need that, because it prices our consumer out of their property. And when we have an issue with our consumers not being able to afford to purchase another home for, sometimes due to tax increase, I think that harms Texas Realtors, that harms each individual agent, that harms all licensees. It affects TREC, it affects Texas Realtors, it affects all of us. So
and constitutional amendment elections, Melissa, are so poorly. The voter turnout for constitutional amendment elections is so poor. That and runoffs are the 2 that have the least amount of turnout for Texans. And typically, constitutional amendments pass by a range of like 92%, because the people who go out to vote typically are informed and know what they're voting for. So it's not unexpected that these would pass. It's certainly expected that they will pass, especially with the efforts that Texas Realtors have put forward to make sure that the word is out and what that they do. So, but yeah, please get out and vote. Let's bring that number up by 1 or 2%.
Yeah, everybody go vote. Everybody, each one, reach one. All right. So
the reason we do that public facing and member facing is that if you ever read the constitutional amendments, these propositions at the ballot box, you will not understand them. They're just that way. I have never seen so many double negatives in language. And so that's why we're going to do a lot of public facing and member facing and just keep it simple. We are going to be supportive of this or neutral on this, but here's what they mean. Yeah. And so we will do a lot of that promotion for that reason, that they're hard to understand at the ballot box.
Yeah, I agree with that. All right, well, let's shift gears. Just one more thing that I do want to cover, because I mentioned earlier when I was chatting with Scott, and I said, we had the first date of September on the consumer protection notice and the seller's disclosure. Then we had the October date, and we do have some other things So a few things that are coming up for January 1st, I kind of alluded to that. And those are some other TREC rule changes. So changes in the legislative session, changes here to some of our TREC rules. Scott or Chelsea, do you want to talk about some of the things that are on the horizon for January?
Yeah, look, I'll start and I'll let Chelsea clean up. Probably the biggest thing that I'm seeing a lot of social media posts, and it has to do with the LLCs, and the rule has always been if you have an LLC, you get a business entity license. If you own less than 10% of it, then you have to have $1 million E&O insurance. And CPAs are telling everybody, well, you should have an LLC and have your broker pay the LLC. Well, until this session, the broker could not pay an LLC. So there's legislation passed where the broker can pay an LLC compensation. And I want Chelsea to clean this up when I mess it up. All right, you do not have to be licensed as an LLC to receive compensation from TREC as a business entity. You must have your LLC registered with TREC in order to receive compensation. This has nothing to do with advertising. This has nothing to do with anything but that broker, R. Scott Kessner, writing the check to Marcus Phipps, Harlingen LLC for compensation for a real estate transaction when that LLC is registered with TREC and in good standing with Secretary of State. Okay. There's all this, well, how are we going to track it? Well, we have till January to kind of get all the wheels working on this, but it goes back to the simple thing. As a broker, I better not write a check to an LLC that is not registered and current, or else I am paying an unlicensed person, and I will start that journey that Marcus mentioned earlier. And so that's a big change. But I think us, along with Texas Realtors, we have to communicate. That is a registration, not a license, and it's for compensation only. I mean, theoretically, it will never go outside the brokerage. It's between the broker and their agent. Now, they might do a CDA to a title company or whatever, but that's still within the brokerage. And so, Chelsea, kind of clean it up because it's really not that complicated. And if you get on some of these Facebook groups, I get confused. It's really pretty simple.
Yes. Okay. So timing is everything. If today a license holder's accountant says, you should get paid through an LLC, there's all these great tax benefits to it. Great. But that LLC has to be licensed as a business entity license. That's true until January 1st. And on January 1st, you can still license that LLC. In fact, if that LLC will do any brokerage activity beyond receiving compensation, it must be licensed. But after January 1st, if you have an LLC that will only do brokerage activity relating to compensation, you can avoid that license and instead register the LLC. We're working out all the details in our agency on what that registration will look like. But everything else will stay the same, meaning, if you're an agent with an LLC, you still need to be sponsored by a broker. That's still happening. And all of the other rules aren't falling off. The other thing that remains the same is that if you're doing any brokerage activity beyond compensation, like advertising, then that LLC or S Corp must still be licensed. So there will be an avenue for licensure. There will also be an avenue for registration. If an LLC is already licensed, you don't have to pivot to the registration. You can just keep it. But there are some benefits each way, and you'll want to understand that. And we'll make sure over the coming months that we make that clear. We're in a little bit of a catch-22 because there's a lot of renewals that come due in August and September and October and November and December. All the same rules that are currently in effect remain in effect. This doesn't happen until January 1st. So we'll probably be a little bit slow communicating these changes because I don't want to overly confuse someone who is renewing sometime this fall or winter.
Yeah. Yeah. And then they think it pertains to them because they heard it. I've seen it. I've heard it. This doesn't happen yet.
That's right.
Agree. And I think it will just streamline some of the process for those payments for an agent who doesn't want to be a broker, who doesn't have any interest in becoming a brokerage, so to speak, but they just want the tax advantages. So I feel like that's really what the problem was we were trying to solve. So
That's right. There's one other rule change that I wanted to mention. I know we're pretty much out of time, but I just wanted to mention the wholesaling
okay.
Rule change. That is related to a change in the law that happened this legislative session. So most of you know, but I'll just say it happens in some markets more than others. So I'll explain what wholesaling is. It's not the flipping of a property. It's the model where an individual enters into a contract to buy a piece of real estate and then sells their contractual interest in that property to a third party before closing. So they sell their contractual interest to a third party before closing. So the current law doesn't, there's no license necessary as long as the wholesaler discloses the nature of their interest in the contract to a potential buyer and doesn't otherwise engage in real estate brokerage activity. So that's what the law is today. As of January 1, all that stays the same, but there's an additional requirement of a wholesaler. They must also disclose their interest to the seller, that they do not intend to hold this piece of property. They intend to sell the contractual interest to a third party. That disclosure must be in writing. This is not a new license type. It does not require wholesalers to be licensed unless they're practicing brokerage activity. They still can't perform brokerage activities unless they're licensed, but it does require that disclosure to a seller.
Yeah, I feel like transparency was kind of the theme of today. Transparency on your agency relationship, like with that buyer rep agreement, transparency for a wholesaler to say, you know, I'm not planning to purchase this property as an end user. I think it's a transparency might be our this webinar is brought to you by transparency. I love that. Well, Chelsea, you mentioned that we are out of time, and we are, gosh, we're like 1 minute over. So I know we had so many other things we could have covered today, and there's so much more that licensees need to know. Some of the things that I would have loved to have talked about, and maybe we can do this another time, is MUDs and PIDs and water districts. I would have loved to have talked about seller fraud that's been on the rise and rental scams. Not to mention, we've had some updates to the franchise tax bill. The Texas A&M Research Center funding has made some changes. I think people love to always hear the most common complaints against agents. There's so many other things that we could have covered, but I'm glad we were able to cover the things that we did. So maybe we'll host another one and we'll cover some of those topics the next time if you guys are all agreeable. But for everybody who's watching today, there's going to be a few more resources that people are putting into the chat or into the Q&A section. So if you're still with us, make sure to check on those, because the Texas Realtors Shaping Texas Conference is coming up September 7th through the 10th. We've got some changes with regards to the TREC meetings that if you choose to attend, I believe it begins in November. Y'all tell me if I'm wrong, but I believe starting in November, if you choose to attend a TREC meeting, you can have up to 4 hours of CE during your like a 2-year license renewal, right? So every 2 years, you could potentially get up to 4 hours of CE if you attend a TREC meeting. I think that's great news. There's, of course, the websites that Travis mentioned earlier, competition.realtor, realestatecommissionfacts.com. All of these things I think are great resources for everyone. So if you're still with us, go check those out today. And thank you everybody for being here. It's huge thank you for me. I really appreciate you taking the time, because I know you are all very busy schedules. You have a lot of great knowledge, and I think it's important for the agents to hear that across the state. So I personally really appreciate it. I know everyone else does too. So thanks so much.
Thank you, Melissa. Enjoyed it.
Absolutely. Thank you guys so much. And we will see you at the next one.
Ready. Bye-bye.
Bye, everybody.